is Sheila McLaughlin. I'm the director of the Bernardin Center here at CTU, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to this lecture this afternoon. I think, as many of you know, the Catholic-Jewish relationship, the Catholic-Jewish dialogue is a really important part of the Bernardin Center. In fact, it was really the very first program in the Bernardin Center. And it seems kind of especially fitting this week that we are together talking about the relationship of the Jewish faith with regard to the Second Vatican Council. Cardinal Bernardin was a champion of the principles of the Second Vatican Council, and it just so happens that this Wednesday is the 16th anniversary of his death. So perhaps we can keep him in our hearts and in our prayers as we enjoy and learn from and benefit from this program this afternoon. So Father John Pawlikowski will introduce our speaker, and again, welcome.
Well, good afternoon, both to CTUers and also people from the local community and the wider Chicago community that have joined us. We're always glad to have you with us. In a special way, we welcome Mrs. Nancy Perlmutter, the wife of our the founder in May of the Catholic Jewish Studies program here at CTU, the late Rabbi Chaim Perlmutter. So we're happy to have you with us. The Gregory Baum, the Canadian theologian, remarked in 1986 at a meeting of the Catholic Theological Society here in Chicago that in his opinion, the document, chapter 4 of the document Nostra Aetate from Vatican II represented the most radical change of the ordinary magisterium to emerge from the council. It was truly a momentous change, one that I think was due so much to the strong support given it by Pope John XXIII. Our speaker today is someone who has spent a lifetime implementing that document from the Jewish side and in the context of Jewish-Christian relations and in particular Jewish-Catholic relations. Jim Rudin and I have been conspirators in this effort for many, many years, I think longer than either of us would care to remember. But we've always worked extremely well together, and it's indeed a pleasure to welcome him back to CTU. He's been involved in some previous conferences here, but this is, I think, at least his third visit here to CTU. Rabbi Rudin attended Wesleyan University and George Washington University. He earned a rabbinic degree from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati. He did graduate studies in history at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. But his principal role was as Director of Interreligious Affairs for the American Jewish Committee for many years, which enabled him to participate in many kind of official dialogues between the Vatican and the Catholic leadership. He has met both Pope John Paul II and Benedict XVI. In recent years, he's become a published author. His two most recent books are Christians and Jews, Faith to Faith, Tragic Past, Promising Presence, and Fragile Future, and a new book on three of the American cardinals that played a decisive role in the development of contemporary Catholic-Jewish relations. And the title of the book is Cushing, Spellman, O'Connor, The Surprising Story of How Three American Catholic Cardinals Transformed Catholic-Jewish Relations. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my good friend and esteemed colleague, Rabbi A.J. Rudin.
Well, thank you, John, for that rather incomplete, inadequate, and too short introduction. I just spoke to my wife in Florida. People are still voting in Florida. Last Tuesday, which I think was election day, it only took us 3 hours, but there were really some people who took 7, 8, 9 hours. And actually on our little island of Sanibel where we live in the winter, there were people voting long after we knew that Senator Nelson was reelected and your neighbor was reelected President of the United States. They were voting till 12 and 1 a.m. in the morning. That's how bad it was. I hope it was better in Illinois. But, so they're still voting, and the count has not yet come in yet, and they're still counting. I do want to acknowledge the presence not only of Father John Balakowski. I will tell you when we first met. I do care to remember. It was in the 20th century, and it was 1968. So we've been at it a long time. And John is one of the national treasures. He's an international treasure in this world of Catholic-Jewish relations. And you all should treasure him. You know, it's always someone's a prophet except in his or her hometown. So I hope you all recognize John Balakowski's great international reputation, which is well earned. When I say international, just ask him where he's traveled to. Ask him how many air miles he has. Ask him how he has a special permit to go through the security lines early because he's John Balakowski. And he's a dear friend and a colleague from my professional life, and I'm honored to be here. And then David Sandmel is here with his wife Janet, who happens to be she's my cousin by not too far apart, maybe 2-3 second cousin. And you have another treasure in David Sandmel, whom of course you know. He's taught here, and so I'm glad that the Sandmels are here. And Jeff Grove, brother Jeff, is way in the back. And Jeff and I go back to 475 Riverside Drive in New York, which is the home of the one and only National Council of Churches, where brother Jeff spent. I wouldn't say it was a penitentiary, but it was a correction institution. Now he's retired, and it was wonderful to see you. In Father Palakowski's introduction, which was a little too long, actually, he omitted one thing that you should know here at CTU. Where I got interested in interreligious relations was when I was a chaplain in the United States Air Force in Japan and Korea and a little bit of Vietnam. And it was there that I began in the 60s, before Vatican Council, to explore and learn about Christians, and Christians learned about Judaism because we shared the same building and the same staff and the same worship space. So it was pre-Vatican II, where Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, there were no Muslims at that time, but we all worked together. And so I owe the U.S. Air Force a great deal, not only 2 years in Japan and Korea, which I would never have without the Air Force, but it was my inspiration to get into the world of interreligious relations. I want to move rather quickly and talk about October 1958. A rotund, jolly 77-year-old Italian cardinal was about to succeed the recently deceased Pius XII. The date was October 20th, 1958. Now, most of the world believed the new pontiff when John XXIII, the name he adopted, coming from Venice. Now, when you say Venice, most of you all think of Italy. I think of Florida. Venice I know, and also it's the Naples that I know is south of where I live. Now, you're from the real Naples, Father, but there is another Naples. But anyway, John XXIII, who was, of course, the Archbishop of Naples, chose the name, he became John XXIII, and everyone looked on him as a caretaker, an interim leader who would maintain the status quo of the curia, of the church. He would be an inactive figure who would simply permit the entrenched bureaucracy to continue until the real pope could be elected. And after all, it had been a long reign of Pius XII from 1939 until 1958, 19 years. And many people called him the accidental pope, that is, Giuseppe Roncalli. Now, of course, we know, in hindsight, such predictions were wildly inaccurate because it was John XXIII who called for what we now term the Second Vatican Council, the whole future of the church in the post-World War II era. Now, people underestimated John the 23rd, and in this Shapiro family lecture, I want to focus a little bit on him at the beginning. When he called for a council, it received very little attention. I went back into the archives to look at it. Most people sort of dismissed it as some kind of wild idea of the new pope. But they got serious when they looked at John the 23rd and when they read this phrase, which this group surely knows almost by heart. John the 23rd said, "We must throw open the windows of the church and let the fresh air of the Spirit breathe through." Then they knew he was serious about confronting the scientific and the intellectual revolutions of the 20th century. 2 world wars. Remember, he had been an Italian army chaplain in World War I. The 3 totalitarian regimes of that era: communism, fascism, and Nazism. The horrific Shoah, the Holocaust, the mass murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. John the 23rd wanted Catholics to face up to that dismal history and to make positive changes, especially vis-a-vis Jews and Judaism. And so, in researching my book, which here it is, show and tell, here we go, which will soon be made into a major motion picture. On all seriousness, he didn't make Catholic-Jewish relations the centerpiece of his Vatican Council agenda. He wrote, and this is quoting Cardinal Roncalli, during the Shoah, he says, "We are dealing with one of the great mysteries in the history of humanity. Poor children of Israel. Daily I hear their groans around me. They are the relatives and fellow countrymen of Jesus." Now, during the Second World War, again, you all will surely know and remember that he was, for a while, the Vatican's diplomat in Turkey and Greece. And in 1942, he was transferred to Paris under occupation by the Germans as the nuncio to France. John the 23rd used his Vatican credentials and his cunning, there's no other word for it, to save thousands of Jews in Europe with the help of many groups in the Catholic Church. And I want to shout out especially the work of the Sisters of Zion. Now, 50 years ago this autumn, 1962, over 2,000 bishops arrived in Rome and began their frequent flyer mileage of 3 years back and forth to Rome. It continued till 1965, and they confronted and passed and adopted many ecclesiastical reforms that you all are quite familiar with. But none was more important, at least for the Jewish community, than the Catholic Church's beginning to look at its frequently negative and turbulent relations with Jews and Judaism. Now, John the 23rd wanted his church to officially change much of its teaching, its preaching, its liturgy, and its beliefs, and its studies about Jews and Judaism. He and other church leaders, including many American Catholics, wanted a new relationship with the relatives of Jesus, as Cardinal Roncalli called the Jewish people. One that would be built on mutual respect and understanding and not bigotry and hatred. Now, it all sounded very good in October 1962. Easy, piece of cake, or piece of pizza, or whatever it was in Rome. It would be simple, it would be easy. It was not. It was a very difficult task for a global church, the Catholic Church, to begin to look at the pathologies of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. And I think there are 2 different pathologies, anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, that were embedded in the hearts and minds of many Catholics throughout history. Not all, and in many parts of the world, not all the parts. And although deicide, the Christ killer charge, was never an official doctrine of the church, the obscene and lethal charge had been hurled at Jews for centuries, sometimes with lethal results. So it was an enormous task to transform the church's encounter with the Jewish people and Judaism. But under John the 23rd's leadership, and then he died in 1963, and then that of Pope Paul VI, who took over from the so-called caretaker pontiff, and their work inspired a host of Catholic clergy and lay people, including Father Kolakowski, to work to achieve purposeful change throughout the church. I won't bore you with all the drafts that went back and forth that Cardinal Bea wrote, and the bitter debates, and it was 3 years of some struggle. But on late October 1965, in our time, Nostra Aetate was adopted by the bishops. The vote was very close. It was really a nail-biter. 2,221 bishops voted yes, 88 voted no. An overwhelming victory. The declaration is in English, less than 700 words. It specifically denounced anti-Semitism. It urged mutual respect and understanding. It called for the establishment of biblical and theological studies, as well as fraternal dialogues, such as we're going to have here today, between Catholics and Jews. The word deicide, although it was in an earlier draft, it's not in the final draft, not in the final text. But the charge of Jewish culpability for Jesus' death was rejected by Nostra Aetate. I think we all agree on that, even though it's not specifically in there. Someday, if you want to, you need a sedative, I would urge you to go back and read the 4 or 5 drafts and how the bishops grappled with it, and how they worked through it, and how the question of conversion of the Jews was in, not out, and how it all came out finally in late October 1965. Now, when that happened, almost 50 years ago, there was extraordinary excitement and energy in both communities. It was as if a dam had broken after thousands of years. And I want to thank not only of Cardinal Bernardin, whose anniversary of passing is coming shortly, but there were many men and women in both communities, clergy and lay. Tom Brokaw called the post-World War II generation of Americans the greatest generation. Well, I want to say that the people who grasped the meaning of what happened in Rome in October 1965, for me, are part of the greatest generation. You and I, and Father John Kolakowski, and Professor Rabbi David Samuel, we are the second or even third generation, the Joshua generation, after the leadership of that first generation, who grasped and understood Nostra Aetate and saw that it didn't have to be put in the dustbin of history, but that it could be made into a living document and made into something powerful. And that's why we're here even today, almost 50 years later. So we should remember who they were. Their names should be inscribed in our hearts, because those Catholics and those Jews, many of them no longer in the land of the living, really paved the way for the kind of work that we've been able to achieve. Now, 50 years later, since the start of the Vatican Council, I want to invoke a pagan image, a Janus image. I know we're not supposed to be pagans, but I often think pagans get a bad rap in history. We look back and we strain to look forward at the same time, two-faced. We know pretty much what happened and has happened since 1965, but we cannot know what's going to happen in the future. But we do know there's going to be certain themes that will still always be with us in this encounter between the Roman Catholic Church and its members and the Jewish people. I'll tick them off very quickly. The impact of the Shoah on Catholic-Jewish relations, the persistence of anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and yes, anti-Catholicism. the meaning of modern state of Israel, with all of its glories and achievements, with all of its problems, with all of its errors and mistakes, but the meaning of Israel for both communities. The need for historians to jointly study the appropriate Vatican archives, those documents, to analyze the wartime record of the Church and particularly of its leader, Pius XII, from 1939 to 1949, or even all 19 years of Pius XII's pontificate. The prickly nexus of mission, witness, conversion, and teshuvah. The issues of human rights, religious liberty, the freedom of conscience, the relationship between religion and state, the impact of liberation theology on both of our communities. Moral guidelines should be developed, something that Cardinal Bernardin was very interested in. Moral guidelines for the advances in bioethics, what happens after one is born, and examining the teachings of the other in our Catholic and Jewish traditions. That's a full plate. It was a full plate in 1965. It remains a full plate today. We have to also look at our inadequate record involving women and young people in the central decision-making of Catholic-Jewish relations. I'm married to a woman. I have 2 daughters. I have a granddaughter, and one of my daughters is a rabbi. So I have 4 women immediately in my life, all the time, and we are not doing the right job. It's inadequate in involving women and young people in Catholic-Jewish relations. We also need an answer, and you all can supply it, to the question that's often thrown at us. Father John Pawlikowski and I hear all the time, well, that's very nice what you guys are doing, but it's really a minuet, isn't it, of ecclesiastical diplomacy. It's a kind of waltz, but it's nothing more. Our late beloved colleague from the Anti-Defamation League, Rabbi Leon Klinicki, used to call it, we need more than tea and sympathy in Catholic-Jewish relations. Now these themes and these questions will always be with us. But I'm also concerned by what many of us see 50 years later as flashpoints in the continuing controversy surrounding the Holocaust-denying views of Richard Williamson, who's a member of the Society of St. Pius X. The troubling issues still that have emerged from the Good Friday prayers regarding Jews. And there are other points of tension. There's a clear sense among some observers in both communities that our long-standing relationship is being minimized, or I'll use the fancy word, being marginalized in many parts of the world. And that a sense of exhaustion, the excitement is over, or as B.B. King said, the thrill is gone after 1965. And we have an intellectual and spiritual exhaustion that's set in. That's why last week I welcomed the Roman Catholic Cardinal in Rome, Cardinal Kurt Koch, who is in charge of Catholic-Jewish relations for the Vatican, when he went on public record in the Vatican newspaper to say that he and his superior, the Pope, are not backing down, not weakening, and are not weakening their commitment to Nostra Aetate and the teachings of the Vatican II. He is the president of the Pontifical Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews. And he said, many Jews fear, this is a direct quote, that through the eventual reintegration of the series of priests and faithful, he's talking about the Pius X Holocaust deniers, with anti-Jewish tendencies, that we may reject Nostra Aetate. The Catholic Church, he said, will not give a new direction to the dialogue with Judaism. And then finally, the Cardinal said, the Pope has charged me with presenting the question the correct way. Nostra Aetate is not being questioned in any way by the magisterium of the Church, as the Pope himself has demonstrated repeatedly in his speeches, his writings, his personal gestures towards Judaism. It is moving firmly on the basis of the principles of Vatican Council II. So we hear that last week. It's encouraging, and we want to keep watching to see that indeed that is what is going to happen and will happen. And finally, Cardinal Koch ended and said, "One cannot be surprised that Pope Benedict is continuing the work of reconciliation begun by his predecessors in the Jewish-Catholic dialogue." So let's hope and let's work that there's no erosion, no retreat from the permanent commitment that we've just heard and that began in 1965. Now, let me say there are 4 overarching realities that transcend Chicago in November of 2012. And these 4 realities are going to impact for the next, well, I would think for more than 50 years on our future relations, our future encounter between Catholics and Jews. Let me put the first 2 realities together because they're interrelated. And they all end in Y, all these 4 realities. The first 2 are demography, which you hear now about the election, but I want to use it in a different way. Demography and geography. The rapid and continuing global population growth has major consequences for Catholics and Jews. Since the 5th century, Europe and more recently North America have been the key centers of Catholic population, clerical leadership, religious thought and theology, seminaries, and the rest. But you and I know that today most of the world's Christians, including Catholics, do not reside in Europe and North America. They reside in South America, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. It is a demographic trend that is accelerating, even as the number of Christians, including Roman Catholics, is either barely holding steady or actually declining in Europe and North America. Christian and Jewish communities on those 2 continents are older in age, you can look at my hair, older in age and fewer in number than their co-religionists in the rest of the world, especially when compared to residents of the so-called Third World. Now, this shift in population centers will influence both Christianity and Judaism in the 21st century, especially Catholic-Jewish relations. Let me share with you just a few statistics, not too many. It came from the Vatican Statistical Yearbook on the Church, and it makes this point. Between 2000 and 2008, the Catholic population in Asia grew by 33%, by 15.6% in Africa. In Oceania, which is Australia and parts of the Pacific, it grew by 11%. And the Catholic population in the rest of the Americas, that's south of us, grew by 10.9%. Most of it, of course, in Central and South America. The increase in European Catholic population during those same 8 years, 2000 to 2008, those same 8 years was 1%. 1 out of every 5 Catholic priests in the world is either from Asia or Africa today, or South America. And as we speak, European priests make up less than half of the world's Catholic clergy, a drop of 4% in less than a decade. Now, could it be, just could it be, that Europe and North America, which has been a long time spiritual, intellectual center of Catholicism and Judaism, losing their dominance and their influence? And we don't know these answers because my late father-in-law, who dabbled in at the University of Illinois as a professor in statistics, said, well, statistics can prove a lot of different things. You have to be very careful in predicting anything. So we don't know the answer because human history is always more than a series of demographic statistics and geographical trends. But there are some examples, and I think we need to look at them. And those statistics are not So welcome to people living in Europe and in North America as Christians and Jews. And the British Empire, which of course in 1533 broke away from the Roman Catholic Church and expanded through the world, and the Anglican Church sent out mission churches, as you know, in colonial possessions in Africa, Asia, in Oceania, in the Caribbean, and South America. It was the flag, the Union Jack following the cross. Today, the Anglican Church in the United Kingdom and its American counterpart, your neighborhood Episcopal Church, are suffering losses in membership. But the younger Anglican mission churches are increasing in size and are politically and theologically more conservative than their ecclesiastical mentors. It's an old story. Child grows up, breaks from the inherited views of the parents, and goes off on its own. Pope Benedict has repeatedly expressed his concern about the shrinking number of active Catholics on the European continent. The causes for his concern are not our discussion particularly today, but there are many. But they do include the clergy sexual abuse scandals, the secularization of the First World, as he calls it, the decreasing birth rate among some Catholics in North America and Europe, and the growing shortage of priests and sisters on both sides of the Atlantic. And it is a trend, I'm told, is likely to continue. But Catholics in general, and priests in particular, from Africa, Asia, and much of Central and South America, have often had minimal contact with Jewish communities. So there's a gap, a demographic and a geographical gap in Catholic knowledge. And David Sandmel, John Pawlikowski, and I, and others would all agree that interreligious relations is often very personal, up close, building trust relationships, not through theological papers and documents and conferences, but by friendships, by interpersonal friendships. And if there's no Jewish community to build upon those friendships, then there is a gap. Not that we feel terribly that they're mistaken, but simply a gap in many Catholics in the world who have no real knowledge or personal experience with a vibrant, viable Jewish community. And in a similar fashion, Jews, except maybe those living in Central and South America, have had limited contact with Catholic clergy and laity from that part of the world, from Asia, and from Africa. So it's part of a larger problem, the demography and the geography. That's two of the problems. The third problem is simply chronology. And chronology simply means that time is passing and that those great leaders of the past who experienced the Shoah, Catholics and Jews, the creation of the State of Israel, the Vatican Council of the 1960s, the achievement, they are passing from the scene, and a new generation is growing up, and new generations, and who knew not through their fault, but by time and place of birth, those actual events. Also, it must be noted, in still speaking of demography and geography, that if it's not on November 12th, 2012, today, it will be tomorrow, that the single largest identifiable Jewish community in the world will no longer be the United States, if it isn't already. It will be in Southwest Asia, in the state of Israel. And we often forget that Israel is not in Europe, it's not in North America, it's in Asia. And that increasingly, a large number of the Jews in Israel are not of Ashkenazic or European background, but come from third world countries, as we call them. And indeed, there will soon be the majority of the Jewish population, not only in the world in Israel, but that the majority Jewish population in Israel will no longer be from Jews from Central and Western and Eastern Europe. So demography and geography are very important to understand the future of Catholic-Jewish relations. Just for instance, 850,000 non-Ashkenazic Jews came from Arab or Muslim countries from Africa and from Asia and live in Israel. Some of them are descendants of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews who were expelled in the late 15th and early 16th century. And so they're challenging the dominant Ashkenazi image and reality of modern Israel. Now we come to the third of the trends that cannot be reversed in my judgment, and that is, of course, after geography and demography, is chronology, the relentless march of time. It's been slightly less than 50 years since the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council and the Nostra Aetate Declaration. That means, as I said earlier, that at least 2 generations now of Catholics and Jews throughout the world have been born, have been educated, and they are the new Catholics and the new Jews. And many of them, as this group knows only too well, are often unfamiliar with, that's at best, or unaware of, at worst, of the recent advances in Catholic-Jewish relations that the Council set in motion in 1965. So the eyewitnesses to the best and worst in our shared history, victory in World War II, the Shoah, the creation of the State of Israel, the Second Vatican Council, the remarkable actions of cardinals like Joseph Bernardin and others, remarkable actions of several popes and Jewish leaders, they will become fewer and fewer and fewer with each passing year as God gathers them home. Many of us speak to universities and colleges and seminary students, and I've discovered personally that the mists of legend and forgetfulness often obscure much of our achievement in Catholic-Jewish relations. So we have to redouble our educational efforts in developing an understanding of what we achieved and what we want to achieve during these past decades and into the future, especially for younger Catholic students and younger Jewish students. It was a sociologist that you all studied in either high school or college, Max Weber, who raised the issue of whether and how religious charisma can be transmitted or routinized from one generation to the next generation to the next generation. How our teachings, our charisma, our traditions can move through time and space. Now, the question we have to answer, are we doing as well in transmitting the charisma of positive, constructive Catholic-Jewish relations to the next generation and to the next generation after that? Or will our efforts first be minimized, then marginalized, and finally, God forbid, trivialized as future generations of Catholics and Jews, of priests, of sisters, of brothers and rabbis, cantors engage in more important work and interreligious projects and programs? When I went to Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, the small group of Jews and Christians who were interested in religion, we were the weird ones back then. We were strange because everybody knew on that campus that religion was passé, it no longer impacted on culture or politics or science or literature or music. It was something we did in the corner on Friday nights and Saturday morning and on Sunday mornings. And we were the weird ones who still talked about religion and observed certain religious quaint practices. Today, many years later, we know that religion with a capital R, a big capital R, dominates in some parts of the world politics, religion, culture, the whole stage of history. So religion is no longer some quaint, antiquated set of beliefs that will soon be superseded by reason or science or all the rest. So religion plays such a major role in the 21st century, and we would be doing a disservice if we who are committed to Catholic-Jewish relations do not participate fully in that ongoing relationship between religion and society, religion and nationhood, religion and culture, and religion and politics. Now, the Greek Heraclitus declared, no one ever steps into the same river twice. It's not the same river, and it's not the same person. So chronology may not shape our future, but it is an irrevocable, irreversible reality of Catholic-Jewish relations. So anybody who's under the age of 100 here, we need to call on you to be active. The fourth and final reality we have is the geography, how that's changed, and demography, how the populations of our two communities, faith communities, has changed, and chronology as we move from next generation to next generation. The fourth one is the one that is perhaps the least reported, but it may ultimately be the most important. That is technology. 50 years ago, at the Vatican Council, there were no fax machines. There was no email. There was no internet. No Skype, no iPads, no Kindles, and few if any conference calls. When one of my cardinals, Richard Cushing of Boston, volunteered to spend money at the Vatican to have simultaneous translations from the arcane Latin into 5 or 6 different languages, he was turned down. That was for many reasons. We can talk in the question period why he was turned down. But even that little bit of technology was discarded. So the council was conducted in Latin. No earphones for the bishops. Many of them could not understand the Latin, as it turned out. But the technology today, and it will of course gallop and expand. 2012 will be looked back on as we were rather primitive with our technology back then. Today we have online academic courses, some of which I've participated in, some of which you participated in. Sure. There are virtual colleges and universities and even seminaries that exist in cyberspace. In 1965, as I said, there were no e-books, no e-magazine. And when you talked about texting back then, you referred to biblical studies, looking at a concordance, not to instant communications between people. There were no online internet partnerships among libraries. The latest is an interesting internet library connection between libraries in Berlin and libraries in Israel. There were no social networks like Facebook and Twitter, no personal blogs, no mobile cell phones. They were a rarity, a luxury. Maybe politicians had some big monster ones that they used. But the personal computer that we take so much for granted today, back then, was in its early development stage at, not far from here, Champaign-Urbana, the University of Illinois. Today's laptop, I'm told by members of my family who are younger than I am and experts in computers, they tell me, my nephew, that in this field, a laptop computer that we use every day has more power than the computers of the 1969 spacecraft that first brought humans to the moon. Like the other three realities that I mentioned, technology is dramatically shaping our future relations with one another. As Elizabeth Barrett Browning said in another context, let me count the ways. Jews and Catholics can now easily communicate with one another outside the once formal boundaries of church and synagogue. It's not simply that Catholics and Jews often share the same workplace or workspace. Rather, technology is so easily available that they can go global at any time and encourage to meet with people anywhere, at any place, to discuss any issue. For instance, I happen to be very interested and have been online the last few months, the influence of Moses Maimonides on Thomas Aquinas. It sounds arcane, but it's a very interesting subject to me. You would be amazed, maybe you wouldn't be amazed, how much technology is out there on this one subject, the Rambam, as we call him in Hebrew, Moses Maimonides on Thomas Aquinas. And you can do this on any subject with people from all contacts everywhere in the world. They no longer require the leadership of clergy, or dare I say it, professors, the physical setting of a college or a university or a seminary, or even the reading of actual books in libraries. None of that is needed to establish or develop or to strengthen Catholic-Jewish relations in cyberspace today. And of course, such Catholic-Jewish encounters are frequently, and here's where it gets painful for some people, those contacts are totally independent of academic or clerical guidance and leadership. Father John and I were having lunch today, and I said a papal declaration, a rabbinic statement, and a personal blog, they all look alike. They're the same size on our computer screens. It is we who can make the font bigger or smaller, but it all looks alike on the screen. In addition, technology now provides what some have called webinars instead of seminars, and you've all participated in them. They're not the greatest right now, but they're going to get better and better and better. Webinars at their best allow teachers to reach in one morning. I was told on one of them that I was on, in one morning, more students around the globe than they could ever teach in person during their entire academic career. That's if you have a good subject. For centuries, Jews and Catholics conducted worship services as faithful peoples of God in what are now called big boxes, stationary physical buildings. We call them churches and synagogues. Big buildings, beautiful buildings. And the biblical commandment that some of us are familiar with in Exodus says, "Build me a sanctuary that I may dwell among you." That's Exodus 25:8. Now the text does not say God dwells in the sanctuary. It says, "Build me a sanctuary that I may dwell among you." God dwells with the people in the sanctuary, but not in the sanctuary itself. So as an internet devotee, I interpret this verse to mean that God dwells among those connected with one another via the computer. We're also seeing the proliferation of Catholic couch churches, I've seen them called. Those are churches that don't really exist physically, but people are together on the computer, sometimes praying, sometimes singing, sometimes studying. They don't eat together at the same place. And there are sofa synagogues, they're called. The same thing, small groups from all around the world who meet at a certain prescribed time to talk, to discuss, to text, to Skype. These decentralized gatherings of Jews and Catholics who study and pray and talk together in non-structured form, they do it, I hate to tell you, without benefit of clergy. One result of the Pope's actions 3 years ago, in the case of Williamson, the well-known Holocaust denier, was Benedict's poignant, I'm talking about the Pope here, poignant words of apology in March 2009, in which he specifically mentioned the internet and the vast amount of information it contains. This is what Benedict said, quote, "An unfortunate mishap for me was the fact that the Williamson case momentarily upset peace between Christians and Jews, as well as peace within the church. It is something which I can only deeply deplore." So far, so good. But here's the interesting part from Pope Benedict. "I have been told that consulting the information available on the internet would have made it possible to perceive the problem early on. I have learned the lesson that in the future, the Holy See will have to pay greater attention to that source of news," to which I can say, welcome to the 20th century, the 21st century. But it is very interesting that the Pope in an official statement actually talks about the internet and why he didn't use it. You could have found all you wanted to know about the so-called Bishop Williamson. So my point is a simple one. Advocates of Catholic-Jewish relations are going to have to learn to utilize the new communications and information technology that is exploding throughout the globe. Do we need another Williamson case to illustrate this point? Do we need another Egyptian revolution that used cell phones to grasp the fact that millions and tens of millions of people can communicate, analyze, and organize their political, their economic, their cultural, their social, and their religious convictions in a single instant, a single click of the computer? We put a parenthesis. I live in a heavily Republican area, and I talked to our Republican chief, and he said, "Jim, we made a great mistake. we thought television advertising was going to do the trick for us. We had no idea that the Obama campaign was so advanced in their technology with the Twitters. He didn't call it a tweeter, but he didn't even know. He said, we just thought we could blitz everybody with television and that would be sufficient. And of course, they will catch up, but technology is galloping ahead. So we, in closing, who want to be Catholic and Jewish leaders, need to recall that in the past, what counted were the control of land routes, the river and sea lanes. They were vital to gain influence and control and shape history. Physical control, geographical control. Today, that's not always necessary. Control of cyberspace, social network is paramount. The next 50 years, when we meet again here at CTU, will bring even more technology to the Catholic Jewish table. As I said when I began, I am keenly aware there's no substitute for the up-close and personal interreligious encounters such as you have here at the Bernardin Center. We're all beneficiaries of such encounters, but I'm also keenly aware that we who would like to be leaders in Catholic-Jewish relations, we still operate sometimes as if it was 1965 or 1968 when Father John Pawlikowski and I met. It is 2012. We act as if the world and the people we're supposed to be leading are somehow still waiting for us to act, to teach, to speak, to motivate, to lead, as if they're waiting for us. Not at all. Technology has empowered them to create their own interreligious realities. So we have to do the same. Those of us who are engaged 50 years now after the Second Vatican Council might recall Betty Davis's famous line in the American 1950 award-winning film, All About Eve. I love that movie. I love the name. That's the name of one of our daughters, Eve. You remember when Betty Davis walks up the steps and she turns around and she says, quote, "Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night." That is Catholic-Jewish relations of the future. The plane is going to fly. We're going to land. But fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. But being a rabbi, Hollywood must not have the last word, the last pessimistic or negative word regarding our future relations. Instead, I want to conclude with the prophet Zechariah, who spoke, Zechariah 9:12, if you're texting, who spoke of being prisoners of hope. That is who we are as Catholics and Jews, or we would not be here today. And that is who we must always be in the future. Thank you very much.